This conference will now be recorded.
Excellent. I guess that's my cue. Hi everybody. Ryan and I are here today to talk to you about the next stage of the Conwy Valley Resilience Project that I've been leading for Network Rail since March 2019. I came along, I think it was probably September 19, came along with two of my colleagues, Andrew John and Mitchell Pether, to give that presentation, and I'm delighted to have Ryan Barrett with me today from the design team, and somebody who's been pivotal in the success of the project. So without further ado, okay, so there's me. If you can't see my face or I don't look very smart, there's me. My name is Alex Hinshelwood. As Andy said, I'm the program manager in the asset and engineering team for the strategy and planning work streams. And I'm aligned to Wales and Borders route, but I am a regional resource, so Wales and Western Region resource. My background, I know a lot of people on the call know me, but for those who don't, I joined Network Rail in 2005 as a rail management technician, and subsequently via the graduate program ended up in the world of drainage randomly after doing track for the whole of my graduate program, and I became the first drainage engineer in the then embryonic Wales route back in 2011. I then stayed in that discipline and taken on off-track accountabilities until 2017 or 18, I can't remember which one. And then I took a bit of a sideways move into a different part of the business as the route asset systems and integration manager, and then in September last year moved into my program manager role, taking some of the activity that the RASIM used to undertake with me into this role under the Putting Passengers First reorganisation in September. And I don't think I would have let anyone else have Conwy, even if I wasn't allowed to keep it. So yes, Conwy is a big part of my life, it seems. I sort of lived and breathed it, and I'm extremely proud of everything that we've managed to achieve up there. So that's me.
Hi guys, so yeah, I'm Ryan. I work for the Network Rail design and delivery team and cover the Wales and Western region. I've worked for Network Rail for about 2 years now after securing a placement from the Cardiff Applied Environmental Geology Masters. So I'm a geotechnical design engineer. I mainly work on unlined rock tunnels and rock shafts, as you can see in my pictures there. And I also work on some of the resilience projects with Alex and his team, developing sites like the Conwy Valley, coming up with new solutions to old problems that make the assets more resilient to existing and future weather events. So yeah, next slide, Al. So here's a bit of a promo video that was released on Network Rail media platforms to introduce the scheme to you. It was actually narrated by myself, which only took me about an hour and 23 takes to actually record the final voiceover. So I hope you enjoy. And then I'll pass you over to Alex after the video to talk through a bit in a bit more detail of the Conwy Valley. So
okay, let's hope this works. Thumbs up if you can hear it, Ryan.
Okay.
Extreme rainfall in North Wales in the last 2 years has caused significant flooding to the Conwy Valley line. The power of the rising water has completely washed away parts of the railway. This has meant long closures whilst we have repaired the damaged sections. We are now installing rock armour between Talcaffin and Llanrwst to add additional resilience to the line. You can see around 20,000 tonnes of rock are being installed to just over a mile of embankment. We're replicating the work we did in 2019. This was successful in protecting the line south of Llanrwst from more significant damage during this year's storms. There's never a good time to close a railway, but by making it more resilient, we are helping to future-proof the line and make it more reliable for passengers. The Conwy Valley Line is a social and economic lifeline, for the local communities it serves. And we'd like to thank you for bearing with us whilst we carry out this essential work.
There we go. Proud dad moment every time I watch that video. Not just of Ryan, but of the whole scheme. You know, it's something I'm extremely proud of indeed. And I'll say that loads of times. So sorry in advance. Most of you already know what the Wales route looks like, but there's a quick representation of the Wales route. As we alluded to earlier, we are now part of the Wales and Western region that covers the whole of the Western route as well. And the engineering asset management and NRDD design delivery teams cover the region, even though some of us are still sort of anchored to a particular route. Anchored is probably the best word, really. You are all aware, some of you, if you are TFW on the call, or Amy will know, obviously, that the valley lines, some of the blue there has been transferred over to Transport for Wales, but we maintain and operate the rest of the route. The Conwy Valley line is just up the top there, the bit in that sort of orangey colour, and that's the bit that we're focusing on for today. So the Conwy Valley line. So we have a railway that runs between Llandudno and Blaen of Stiniog, intersecting the North Wales Coast Railway at Llandudno Junction. ELR is LJT1, and it's 27 miles in length. And there are 12 stations, some of which have the lowest footfall in Wales route, but we won't dwell on that. So here are some photographs. If you have never seen the events that unfold on the Conwy Valley line, particularly around Llanrwst. Llanrwst is an area which is influenced by tidal range of the Conwy estuary and the extreme flows from the Snowdonia or North Snowdonia catchment as well. So there's the signal box. That is the same signal. You can't see any track whatsoever. And then just up in town, that is a little cafe there, which it tends to be seasonal. I wonder why. Yeah, it just gives you a feel for the severity of the rainfall events that we get in that area. So mechanisms of failure. So what the main failure mechanism, or I should say one of the failure mechanisms, is overtopping. And what happens during the overtopping event is that the water rises on the one side of the embankment at a greater rate than the other, and then ultimately the water overtops the railway. And the issue here isn't the overtopping itself, it is the cascade of the water to meet the standing water on the other side. So it's that the velocity of the water as it crests over the top of the railway. And this happens from the highest point, which is obviously the rail. The Conwy Valley is mostly jointed track, before anybody says what about the ballast shoulder. So as the water cascades over the rail, it starts picking up speed, increasing in velocity, and begins to very, very quickly mobilize the ballast and take it away. This is a photograph taken off the road bridge in Llanrwst, looking to the south, and you can see after the period of track, you can see there's some white water there. Well, if anybody joined us for our presentation in 2019, that's where we ended up installing 6 1.2 metre culverts to help take the flow and the pressure off the embankment. And that's what happened after that white water receded. We were left with a very big hole under the track. I'm really pleased to say that the works that we undertook in 2019 held absolutely strong, and we had no impact whatsoever in 2020 through that section. I think I quote the track section manager, "There's not a lump of ballast out of place, Al." There you go, that's what he said to me. And he was as surprised as we all were. So it really proved the concept of the design that we installed in 2019. So the bit that we're concentrating on this year, or last year, sorry, 2020, was the section that we unfortunately ran out of time to remediate fully in 2019, because we had this small thing of the National Eisteddfod in Llanrwst that I'm not sure why, but Transport for Wales were pretty keen to get the trains running for. So I'm just going to run through a few slides here which show the failure scenario at the 2020 site. Just to talk you through the drawing, because it's the same drawing for each. You can see the railway line running towards the right-hand side of the valley floor there. The River Conwy is quite obvious because it's picked out in blue. And what appears on here to be a wall, just on the sort of inside of the River Conwy, is Llanrwst embankment. Now that is a flood bund that was built in the Victorian times to protect the farmland sandwiched between the railway and the flood embankment, to enable that to be made use of. You can see the one thing that Llanrwst embankment does very well is it narrows down the floodplain to what is basically only the river width, which obviously causes problems when we are experiencing extreme rainfall. So yeah, the A470, by the way, also hugs the bottom of the other side of the valley floor, and has been moved in a number of locations because of flooding. So this is a valley-wide problem. So the sort of first main stage 2 on here, is when the river breaks its banks, and you can see the size of the floodplain compared to what Mother Nature intended. It is a fraction, probably about 1/8 of the size of the floodplain. It should be noted there's also a flood defence on the other side of the river to reclaim land that side as well. So the floodplain is significantly reduced. So the next thing that happens then is that the Llanrwst embankment breaches on the north side. So north is closest to the bottom of the screen. That's the lowest point in the embankment, and that's where it breaches first, or overtops first, I should say. And to the north, you can see that little area starting to flood. That is, there's a stream that runs down. We call it Abbey Farm Stream, and that's an unflapped bridge. So there's no kind of tidal flaps on that bridge. So as soon as the water starts to rise, it starts to ingress at that point. So eventually the Llanrwst embankment area completely fills with water, and it starts rising up the railway embankment. The water continues to rise on the other side, but at a much lesser rate, because, as I say, that water is coming in under that one structure. And then what happens eventually, and bear in mind this happened at least 4 times in 2020, the water is completely over the top of the Llanrwst embankment. The water level is almost right at the top of the railway embankment. It doesn't take long then for the water to start seeping through the embankment, through the ballast, and then starts to overtop the railway, causing all of that damage. So the key thing to just note here is that the failure mechanism goes from the riverside inland. So it flows over the top of the railway towards the A470 side, so from west to east. And that's key because it's very different to the other end, which is east to west. And just a bit further down at Dolgarrog, it also goes the other way. So, you know, you can see why each section of this needs its own little engineering solution, because each section, the overtopping goes in two different ways. So if you were to install rock armour where you perhaps initially think you need it, you'll find out very quickly that you didn't, and you needed the other side, which would be a tad embarrassing. So just to show you some of the work that we did in 2019 and some of the damage, this was the scene replicated through this section in 2019, where we had lots of issues, particularly around the culverts. And again, the reason for these issues is because of the drop off into the culvert approaches. You know, through this section, you know, the embankment is relatively shallow and a relatively shallow gradient, slope gradient. So the worst hit areas were absolutely around the culverts, where that water was absolutely raging over. And as soon as it gets a little bit of a bite, that's it. It takes the ballast away. So what did we do? We did not, unfortunately, have time, as I said, to rock armour this section in 2019, but we did do a pretty good job of the culverts. Nice big head walls to retain the railway. In some cases like this at Stonehenge, as we called it, no prizes for guessing why we called it that. We actually rebuilt the whole head wall and the approaches to the culverts. So this is another before and after just down the road, so you can see the issue around the culvert head wall. It was much too small and it didn't retain enough of the embankment to mean that the track didn't get affected. So we extended that at the same time. Also, there was an awful lot of material washed out, not just from the 2019 event, but from previous events, of which the last one was in 2015. So you can see there's a bit of an impact when you think about climate change. 2015, 2019, 2020, 4 times this failed. So it is getting more and more frequent. So, you know, sort of justifying the reason for this resilience activity. So in 2019, we were very aware that we were leaving a risk on the Tanlan section, 1,800 yards worth of risk. So we very quickly took the lessons learned from the summer 2019 works to the south of Llanrwst, and the design delivery team applied the original design to the sections, the typical sections for the Tanlan area. We were hoping to get in and make a start in October 2019, when there was a blockade on for Ryan's work, funny enough, in Llanrwst in the Og Tunnel. But unfortunately, we just didn't have enough time to get everything sorted. And in hindsight, 3 weeks wouldn't have hardly touched the surface of it. But then an opportunity arose out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Probably the only good thing to happen because of the COVID-19 pandemic, where the Conwy Valley, as a very community social tourism railway, had a dramatic drop in footfall, to the extent where Transport for Wales basically decided not to continue running services following the remediation work of spring 2020, which gave us a window of opportunity through the summer, the best time, although you think you wouldn't get flooding in the summer, but we'll touch on that in a moment. And we took the opportunity to get some money and have a go at it, which was absolutely fantastic. So this is what we were faced with in spring 2020. Exactly the same places, pretty much to the sleeper from 2019. All of that brand new ballast in the ditches and in the culvert approaches, and it just felt, you know, like we just didn't quite get it right. You know, and we really should have pushed to get some more done. So, you know, is £1 million worth making sure there were trains to the National Eisteddfod? I'm not sure, because that's basically what it costs to reinstate the track for a second time in less than 12 months. you know, I'm sure we've all got ideas on that. It'd be really interesting to find out from, you know, from somebody in the sort of cultural side of Welsh Gov what price they put on the National Eisteddfod, but it was £1 million anyway. Our works delivery team set about reinstating the ballast in towards the end of February 2020, and then the conversations began to happen probably at the end of June with Transport for Wales and our delivery colleagues about providing some resilience through this section. I think that takes us on to Ryan. It does, excellent.
Cheers, Al. So yeah, as we discussed earlier, this is just a little schematic really of the site. You can see all the track there. So we've got about 1,800 meters of track, 9 culverts, 3 level crossings, various bits of railway furniture. There's ditches leading along the railway, underneath the railway, through the culverts, lots of vegetation, and yeah, these are all things we contended with the design. And obviously all of the damages that we reinstated during those events. Next slide, Al.
I do my Chris Whitty now.
Chris Whitty, next slide, please. And then in terms of the actual rock armour design, the design is pretty flexible. And most of the embankment sections along the LJT1 didn't need much enabling works in order to install a rock armour configuration. We're lucky as well along this section of the LJT1 that our network rail boundary is a fair distance from the running rail, and we have plenty of land for the actual design of the rock armour in some of the other sites we're working on at the moment, or even some discrete sections of these sites. This isn't the case, but yeah, as you can see from the design section, you start off with a key-in trench at the base of the configuration with geotextile laid up the embankment into an anchor trench, which is below the base of sleep level. The rock armour is then sequentially placed up the embankment, interlocking blocks as you go from the bottom to the top. What is not shown in the sketch in this bit is the voids there between the sort of rock armour in red and the track. We decided to fill in with riprap, and you'll see in the pictures further into the presentation. This is one of the key elements that help protect it when the water overtops the railway and flows over and through the rock armour. It just helps to keep everything into place. Next slide, Al. Okay, so from the construction, there's about 3,500 tons of material removed from the key-in trenches, the culvert approaches. As mentioned earlier, about 1,800 meters of rock armour required throughout the length of the site, which was about 20,000 tons overall that we ended up installing. You can see from some of the pictures there of the construction process with the machines on both the track and off track, placing the rock into the prepared embankment. I think there was 1 or 2 engineering trains that we used to remove the material that was excavated from the ditches. But some of the material we used on a bit of the embankment where we had to decrease the gradient in order to place the rock armour. You can see there some of our network rail guys there on site. That's okay. That's perfect. So as Alex mentioned earlier, one of the main problems throughout the site was the culvert sections. So this is where all the water comes through, the immense power charging through the culverts as the water levels change on the section. And yeah, these were some of the most damaged sections in previous events, as Alex showed in some of his pictures. So that we knew that we needed to make these a lot more resilient than just building back again and again and again. So I think I was sat in a presentation with a geotechnical supplier, and they showed some rock armour wrapped in mesh that they successfully used somewhere. I can't remember where. I think it was the Netherlands, which was used for sea defences. And they said it was very successful, given that added bit of security with the rock armour as well. So a light bulb moment sort of went off in my head. So I think this is about the February time that we were starting to have these discussions about going back and doing the rock armour around the LJT1 and having discussions about the culverts. So we decided to put some rock armour around the flanks of the culverts and mesh and bolt it into place to just give it that extra bit of security then with the water, the immense, or as Alex said, the raging power of water flowing through those culverts. Yeah, next slide, Al. So yeah, there's some more pictures here just to show the construction process with multiple machines working along the track, with the rock armour stockpile there at Main and Crossing in that first picture. So the good thing about the site is that we had plenty of room for machines, and the site was quite extensive. So, you know, you could have multiple machines working on track, even though it was a single line track. You could have multiple machines working, placing the rock armour all along the sections, and it was quite successful in how quickly we managed to install the rock armour. You can see there the geotextile coming out of the top of the anchor trench at the top, and you can kind of see in that middle picture there the culverts, the works coming up to that. Next slide, Al.
Oh, sorry, Ryan. I don't know what happened then. I guess that was meant to work like that, was it?
Yeah, that's fine. Go back.
Anyway, sorry. I don't know. I didn't hear a word you were saying, so I doubt anybody else did.
That's all right. It was just saying how lovely that rock was being placed by the machine around the culvert there with the bars pre-installed. So
I could just hear a Merthyr accent in the background.
And that is probably one of my favorite pictures of the entire presentation, because that is actually after a storm event. And as you can see, there's what did they say, Al? Not a piece of rock out of place there. So you can see what I mentioned there earlier. You've got the rock armour, and between the rock armour and the ballast sort of shoulder, we filled that void there with riprap. And that just helped the sort of interlocking process, and with the water coming over the railway, the ballast really hasn't got anywhere to move, and the whole embankment sort of stabilised there. Next slide, Al.
I think it's just worth noting and dwelling on that point for a little while, because when, as you saw from the original design, when we first installed the rock armour at the set distance away from the track, which is required in the Network Rail standards, it became very obvious to us that in some places there was still quite a big drop, you know, up to 1 metre, I would say, from the top of the rail down to where the rock armour interface with the embankment. So this was the beauty of the team that we had on the Conwy project. We had a very tight-knit team, including you know, guys from my team as the client sponsor, Ryan's team from the design, the works delivery team from Shrewsbury, and also our project engineer Tim Howells, who works in the other side of the capital delivery organisation. And we were able to sort of overcome these issues and problems through very, very simple conversations. Ryan would go away, sketch something up, and present it back, and we would get it all signed off. And you know, that made the difference, that riprap between losing ballast and ending up with a big pile of ballast up against the rock armour and none in the track, and it looking like that photograph that I think I agree, Ryan. I think that's one of my favourites as well.
I think it is. Yeah, I keep looking at that and thinking, yeah, I remember walking down the track after the event and looking at that and thinking, thank God for that. But also a very proud moment, like you said earlier. It's nice to see it, especially when you've, been there and seen the water, around. You just think, yeah, it's going to work.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Yeah. So yeah, you can see there some before and after pictures of the process. You can see the embankment before the rock armour was placed, during the placement with the geotextile still there, and then obviously placed with the riprap all looking good there. Yeah, and I think, it's not the worst thing to look at as a strip of rock armour along the embankment. In fact, I probably think it looks a bit better than it did before. So yeah, that's another thing. It's not the worst looking engineering solution, is it?
But we're not at all biased, Ryan.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. Next slide. So what have been achieved to date? So like we said, 1,800 meters of rock armour installed, 9 culverts armoured and meshed and bolted, close working relationship with the stakeholders and landowners. I think we actually received some recognition from some of the landowners saying what a good job we did, rather than the usual complaints that we receive on the railway. And the whole team was all Network Rail. And yeah, that was one of the biggest achievements in my eyes, that, it was 100% Network Rail designed and delivered project, building up relationships within Network Rail, who we not necessarily would have worked as closely with, but by building our relationship, we've managed to achieve a lot more from the project than we would have otherwise.
Absolutely, Ryan. I think just to add to that, I think, the team that delivered this, the guys on the ground, on the machines, they had never delivered a rock armour solution before. They had never put a ground anchor in before. They'd never used mesh before. This was a massive learning curve for our guys, but ultimately it provided a COVID compliant work stream to keep those people working, rather than sitting in their own cars, because they're not even allowed to sit in vans at the moment, sitting in their own vehicles, waiting for the next job. So, it kept everybody working throughout the summer last year, through what we all thought at the time was the worst part of the pandemic, but hindsight is a wonderful thing.
And there's worse places to spend your summer than the Conwy Valley, I suppose. So it was the closest thing to a holiday any of us were going to get. Next slide. So this was one of the events that happened whilst we were on site. One of the 4 events that happened last year, where the water actually overtopped the railway. I was in the right place at the right time, and actually was on the LJT1 at the time doing some rock cutting inspections further down, and I got a call from some of the works delivery gang who are on site saying, you need to come down to the rock armour. And I said, well, I can't come today. I was there yesterday. I need to concentrate on this site today. And they're like, nope, you need to come. There's water overtopping. And I was like, I'll be there in 5 minutes. So I eventually got there, and I think what was really useful is actually seeing that water and how it moves through the site, moves through the embankment, and how it interacts with the rock armour and just the floodplains in general. Because I think until that point, we'd known, that the railway overtops. We'd known that there's a lot of water, but to actually see it in person and see the immense power that was raging through, it was quite something. And that top picture there on the left is basically one of the culverts. Well, not culvert, is a sort of drainage ditch that runs along the railway, and just to see the amount of water draining from the river side of the railway over that it was quite something. Next slide, Al.
I'll have to do a quick double click because this is also a video.
Oh, this is not one I narrated to.
It is, yeah, but I won't put you through it, Ryan. I'll just double click it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so that was some of the pictures there as well. You can see Llanrwst in the other two pictures, some drone footage of the flooding that happened. And this is in August, so this is not even, peak sort of weather event season for us. So to see the railway being inundated with water in August was quite something. And that was me pulling up to site one morning, just on the left picture there, and that's the usual access track we drive down, so didn't actually get to site that day using that access point anyway. So next slide, Al. And like I said, that picture there of the water coming over, that's the same place after that water had been raging through there, and you can see it's taken away some of the actual land there. But yeah, it was just crazy to see how much water actually moves through the site. I think the next slide. And what was something that was really good to see, as well as as one of the designers on this, is how the rock armour stood up to the event, and how much water actually not only flows through the rock armour and over the top of the geotextile as we planned it to or designed it to, but actually how some of the sections of embankment, the water actually passes completely through there, because the amount of times the embankment is being replaced with just ballast has made it rather permeable structure, so the water can move through there. But it was good to see that the rock armour stood up to the water passing through. You can see in those pictures there that the water coming out of the rock armour and into the drainage ditch. And again, my favourite picture there, bottom right, not a stone out of place. And back up to you, Al.
So yeah, we're nearly at the end. You'll be pleased to hear. But we handed back the railway on the 14th of September, which was a challenge. I didn't think handing the railway back would be difficult, but seeing as the railway shut halfway through February, that is 7 months. Well, I certainly didn't appreciate that drivers' competencies on route knowledge only last 6 months. So hence we did not have any drivers that were route knowledge refreshed to open the railway on the 14th. I was extremely pleased that Transport for Wales eventually managed to find a way of doing it. I think there was an instructor drive-in with about 2 other drivers or something silly like that, to be able to run a train on the 14th. But then it went back to buses for 2 weeks while they did all the route refreshing with no passengers. And then eventually we ended up going back to what we would like to call, let's call it full COVID service, towards the end of September, before unfortunately ending up going back to the new lockdown timetable, which replaces most trains on the Conwy Valley with buses, unfortunately. But there we go. And as Ryan said, the solution just sits so well within the environment on the Conwy Valley. It's a very sort of craggy, hard geology anyway, on the surrounding hills and mountains. It really it fits really well, and as you can see, a little bit of Himalayan balsam makes it look just absolutely beautiful. So what happened next? Well, the 4th of November 2020, here comes a flood event, and I was sat at home thinking, please work. Even though I knew that it worked, because it worked in August, every time you just sort of think, oh, flipping heck. Well, I was really pleased again when the section manager phoned me. He always rings me, love him. Neil, he rang me and he said, Alex, he said, 2 days work. And I was like, excellent. And he said, and none of it on any of the rock armour section, which just made me feel extremely pleased with everything and proud again, you know, absolutely fantastic. So there's a short section between Tallacavan and Dolgarrog. Ryan and I visited it 2 weeks ago. There seems to be no reason why the railway washes out at that location, only that the track looks like, you know, when you do the head on the rail test, it looks like it's in a little bit of a dip. So the track it's the low point, and that's where the water comes over. So yeah, 2 days. So the railway closed I think it was on the Sunday. By the time we managed to get road railers and ballast on site, it was Thursday, and then Transport for Wales ran services on the Monday morning, which was just fantastic. So yeah, there we go. There's the guys from the local P-way, and here is this. As far as I'm concerned, this is why it's a success. The local P-way team from Llandudno fixed this in 2 days. It didn't need works delivery, contractors, millions of pounds spending on it. It needed £15,000 for the road railer and 35 tonne of ballast, which is just fantastic. So then here comes Storm Christoph, giving its worst, and it failed in exactly the same place as the time before, which is, as I say, outside of the rock armour section. So Ryan and I are working on a solution for that section at the moment. But this time, because they kind of knew what to expect, there was a bit of ballast left in the yard at Tallacavan. It was, I say repaired in 1 day, it was actually 4 hours start to finish. So it's just absolutely fantastic news story, really. We've gone from 3-month closure and at least £1 million to reinstate the track in 2020, and probably more like £3 million just for the track reinstatement element of the 2019 project. So £4 million, and getting on for 7 or 8 months worth of closure to reinstate the railway, to, you know, £15,000 in 1 day, and being handled by the local P-way team without any need for, you know, outside influence, which is just absolutely fantastic news story. So we are there now, as you can see today. Well, today officially work started, but as you'll see from the photograph in a few slides time, they started last Thursday, because a lot of it was off-track work. So Tyndall level crossing posed us a bit of an engineering headache. Ryan alluded to it earlier. This is the point where we had no land, because back in the 60s, I think it was, British Rail sold a parcel of land with the crossing keeper's house to a private buyer, and basically took, you know, literally I think 1.5 meters, 2 meters between the rail and the boundary fence. So we'd engineered what we thought was a solution that would stand up to the known failure event. So as Ryan alluded to, the known failure event was overtopping. We didn't fully understand the amount of piping that would happen, so the water coming through the embankment, because of the amount of granular material in the embankment from the many years of fixing with ballast, which obviously happened here probably since it was built. So we installed a system called Bafix, which is like half a gabion basket, and that you can see is sitting there a bit buckled. But the reason it's buckled is because the piping failure washed the stone out from underneath it, which is, as I say, something that we didn't foresee when we did the design back in the early part of 2020. So just over to Ryan for that little bit now.
Yeah, so Tyndall really is like the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the works that we did in 2020, because we didn't have the land to put the rock armour in. But yeah, it's a 35-meter section, and we are now, after purchasing the 4-meter strip of land, putting the rock armour in, starting today, as Alex said. So yeah, like Alex, there we
Do
are.
you want to go through that, Ryan? Sorry.
No, it's fine. No, that's
No,
fine.
Okay.
Yep, there we are on site today. Like Alex said, the work started a couple of days before. We're not that quick turning a garden into a work site within a couple of hours. But yeah, we're putting the rock armour in to tie into the rock armour you can see towards the top of that picture, which we know supports the embankment and supports the track based on the failure mechanisms that we expect to happen there. Yeah, so hopefully within the week we'll have a fully complete 1,835 meter section of rock armour that is going to be stand up to all the weather events that we expect in the Conwy Valley. And like Alex said, we'll be looking at the other sections towards the north and hopefully making those a bit more resilient now based on what we know, based on the most recent failures. Oh, and couldn't help to put one of my holiday snaps in as well from my extensive time up in North Wales in the summer. How can you complain about working in the Conwy Valley when you have places like this to have an evening stroll after your hard day on site? So there we go.
And yeah, that's us. That's a wrap, as they say. So yeah, please, any questions? I think hand back over to Andy now for that part of the presentation.
Right, thank you very much, chaps. You can't say it wasn't up to date, can you? So from today on site, so that's really good. So we've had one question come in first, and so from Marek. Says, thanks for a great presentation. How crucial is the proper geotextile anchoring? Can it work in some degraded mode, for instance, after it gets displaced, perhaps during ballast cleaning?
We're actually looking at the geotextile a lot in the design, because what we initially designed was something that's semi-impermeable to protect the embankment section, but actually knowing what we know now with the water moving through the embankment, we're actually looking at the most permeable geotextile we can use. So I suppose we could probably look at it, probably would stand up without that sort of thing there, but when you're designing something to sort of fit in with an existing embankment, you'd assume that the embankment is impermeable, it's got the clay core and everything. But yeah, now we're sort of thinking, actually, we want to make this whole solution, the whole rock armour thing, more permeable to allow as much water to move through as possible, not to stop it in its tracks, not to create any sort of dams. And yeah.
I think just with the ballast cleaning thing in mind, the geotextile we use under the rock armour is well away from that sort of ballast cleaning zone. So it's outside of what would have been the ballast shoulder area if indeed there was a ballast shoulder on the Conwy Valley. But the key thing for us is that the geotextile you saw in some of the photos, the white geotextile under the ballast, that had proved a extremely useful role when it prevented the water from sort of digging deeper into the embankment core. Now, with the rock armour in place, you won't get the ballast being displaced, and therefore the embankment core is protected by the ballast. So it doesn't matter so much whether that geotextile is undamaged, is there. So if it did get damaged with a ballast cleaner, for instance, although I'd love to see a ballast cleaner on the Conwy Valley line, I don't think it doesn't form an as crucial role now we got the rock armour in place. But it absolutely did beforehand to stop the embankment getting scoured away.
Excellent, thank you. So Aaron says, thanks gents, pretty impressive. Right, there's no more questions coming yet, so I've got a question. So we've done all this bit down here, but it's a railway line that has suffered from flooding and bits falling out of the tunnel and all the rest of it over the years. So now we've done that bit, what's going to be the next problem? I mean, is there a solution to move on up to?
I'm working on a few projects actually on the LGT one. It seems like since I started Network Rail, I spent most of my life up here, and I'm looking after all of the rock cuttings at the moment, looking at things to stop things falling out of those. I've worked on Festiniog Tunnel. We bolted and meshed a 70-meter high-risk section of that. I've worked in the shaft of Festiniog as well, where I noticed there was a recent rock fall, and like we said, with Alex and I were up in North Wales a couple of weeks ago, and where we had the recent washouts towards Dolgarrog, we'll potentially be looking at doing something there. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to walk away from the LGT one in a few years, and
I think the key,
not come back.
Key message, the key message on the Conwy Valley is that we're not protecting it from flooding. We are protecting it from the aftermath, if you like, of the flooding. So we are quite happy to allow it to overtop. The railway's generally closed anyway because there's a closure mark on the bridge at Birthday, which is just on the south of Llanrwst. So generally the railway's closed when these events happen anyway. The key thing for us is allowing the railway to be brought back into operational service as quickly as possible after the flood events. But also, as Ryan said, the work he's doing on the rock cuttings and the tunnels, it's all about, trying to minimize the amount of the risk then of those assets causing us problems on the Conwy Valley, so as we can provide a resilient railway from weather, from the rock cuttings, the rock tunnels, all of this is all packaged up with resilience, so as we can start building confidence again in the Conwy Valley line. And we've got lots and lots of opportunity. We've got the Zip World complex, which is just expanding. We've got what was Surf Snowdonia, which is now I think something like Adventure Wales, I think, just near Dolgarrog. Nobody uses the railway to travel to these massive attractions, mainly because nobody's got any confidence in the railway, because, well, that's going to be shut. It would have flooded and washed out in the spring, so let's not plan our holiday in June to use the railway. Local businesses, local B&Bs, hoteliers, they don't advertise the railway. The Surf Snowdonia pamphlet tells you to get off at Llandudno Junction and get a taxi, when Dolgarrog station is about a 5-minute walk away. Yeah. It's trying to do that, and we're working really closely with our colleagues at Transport for Wales at the moment to try and get some oomph back into the Conwy Valley again and get people using it, because ultimately, if it's not reliable, nobody will use it. So that's sort of what we're aiming for.
Absolutely, and that then comes into question whether it's worth maintaining it at all if you're not having any traffic, isn't it? Right.
Absolutely.
So we've got a couple of questions now. Andrew Wilson says, well, he first starts saying, can't wait to see it after lockdown, and I should add to those there that Alex has kindly offered to host a visit up there in the summer when things return to something like normal. And we might tie that in with a trip to see the Barmouth Bridge works as well. Anyway, is the Tannilan embankment maintained? He says, presumably not by Network Rail, and is there a future plan in hand for replacing any armour displaced for any reason? Is it likely to see degradation as on coastal works?
So this is a really good question, and anyone think I planted this one? So obviously throughout the last 2 years, I've been working extremely closely with our colleagues at Natural Resources Wales, built up a really good relationship with the North Wales contingent, and Tannilan embankment is a strange one. So the embankment isn't actually owned by Natural Resources Wales. It isn't actually maintained by Natural Resources Wales. It is simply sort of monitored by Natural Resources Wales is probably the best way to put it. They will spend money on it if they have to, but very often they just won't bother, mainly because it only protects farmland. It doesn't protect life and limb, as they call it. So there was in the February 2020 storms, there was a breach, quite a significant breach in the Tanlan embankment, and Natural Resources Wales had absolutely no drive to repair it, or funding, to be fair. But in the end, that was repaired by the farmers with a small grant from Natural Resources Wales to help with the works. We actually gave them material off our site to help their cause, because they had a very small grant, as I say. So importing material would have been difficult. Tanlan embankment is an interesting one. Natural Resources Wales are looking at all sorts of options with the whole of the Conwy Valley. In terms of protecting life and limb, if Tanlan embankment was not there, it would lower the flood risk to the town of Llanrwst. So obviously there's a benefit for Tanlan not being there. We were always a little bit nervous about that as the railway, because then the railway almost becomes the first line of defence from the river. However, following the works over the last 12 months, we will be fairly comfortable with that being the case, because we have basically turned the railway into a flood defence. But we had to do that because Tanlan was not serving the purpose. It should just be noted, Tanlan embankment is 1/2 metre lower than the railway embankment as well. So when the railway embankment overtops, Tanlan's already underwater.
Right, so it's no longer an effective barrier by that point anyway. No,
not to the railway.
Not for the railway's point of view. Right,
No.
Steve Clark asks, interesting talk, gents. What other solutions were considered before deciding on the rock armour? And also in terms of cost, how does it compare to the other solutions? And he said also a Network Rail now looking at using this solution in other areas.
Yeah, so we looked at all sorts of solutions. We looked at using old sleepers. That was one thing we looked at. Using old concrete sleepers past their design, past their useful life as a sleeper, to build some sort of Jenga affair. We looked at that quite considerably, actually. But it was cost prohibitive, would you believe? Getting the sleepers to site, once they've gone into a yard like Westbury, it's very difficult to get them back on a train and out again, it appears. So yeah, that was discounted for one reason. It was a bit expensive and a bit of a faff. The other reason was it would have looked horrendous. And this is an area of outstanding natural beauty, so we've got to try and at least make it look a little bit tidy. Any solid solution was discounted immediately, because Natural Resources Wales were extremely keen that we allowed for a permeable solution. So the rock armour is a permeable solution. The water can run through it, over it, round it, under it, you name it. It's not going to stop the water. There was a little bit of balancing off about the height of the rock armour, because obviously it is filling up the floodplain. But that was the preferred option for a permeable solution. So any hard engineering was quickly discounted. And besides, you will always end up with that waterfall effect, unless you put a very large reinforced concrete wall or sheet pile wall on the riverside of the railway. But then that would force the flooding upstream and cause a higher risk to the town of Llanrwst and the surrounding area. So yeah, it was the most appropriate solution at the time. And I think it was certainly new to us. It was new to the design team as an option for something that was ultimately an inland flood defence. Bit of a strange thing, but yeah. So there were lots of things talked about. Bathix, the solution we use through Tyndall, that was discussed as a potential option for the full length, but it wouldn't have provided the same design life. And ultimately, we wanted to do this job and walk away. We don't want to be going back to Conwy. I don't want to be going back to Conwy in my career and lifetime, and I'm sure many other people will benefit from that going forward as well.
Yeah. And we're going
Are
to
you
be
planning to use it in any other places?
Yeah, Ryan's bit now.
We're currently developing a scheme near Abergavenny, in between Abergavenny and Hereford vineyards, where we're having similar sort of events where the water's overtopping the railway and causing the same sort of mechanisms of failure through the embankment. Not quite the same, where it's not tidal and controlled by that, but you do get big rainfall events, and the water comes along the one side of the railway, it overtops and washes out the embankment. So we're going to be using it along an 800-meter section of track there, hopefully installed by the end of September, using the same design team, using Alex and the works delivery team to construct it. Now they are the Network Rail in-house experts in rock armour construction. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's another site which has had, again, number of washouts over the years, but just getting more and more frequent, aren't they, with these extreme rainfall events? Any more questions?
I was just going to say, Andy, the stakeholders are a little more challenging up there, because this runs through the middle of their land. The railway, this whole section, 800-meter section, is running through their land. So we've got to think about their needs as well. So we're liaising with them a lot. There's an awful lot of liaison going on, talking them through the designs. It's a lot more of a one-to-one relationship, whereas Conwy was a lot more stakeholders. So yeah, and all of the material, if it doesn't come in by rail, has got to come through their farmyard as well. So they're obviously very interested in making sure that we control that.
Yeah, I'm sure we can do them a favour in return. So yeah. Okay, any more questions? No, in that case, I'd like to call on Philip Dombovan to propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah, hi everybody. Apologies, I'm Ryan. Nobody else was answering the phone apparently, so I was the only one that answered the phone when Andrew was looking for somebody to do this. So it seems a bit weird doing this for you two particularly, but hey, here we go. Of course, a very informative talk from the pair of you. It's quite obvious that you're both incredibly passionate about this project, and that shows through your all the pictures and the diagrams and the drawings that you've shown us this evening, and obviously your continued efforts of going up there and sorting out these issues as they continue to crop up. I thought it was very interesting that we were able to take advantage, if you like, of the COVID situation last summer and carry out all this work in a really cost-effective and timely manner. And I hadn't realised actually that there'd been so many events last year. I wasn't aware there were four events. All a bit worrying, really, isn't it? I suppose when you look at the wider picture of the country as a whole. Great to see that there's obviously a very tight-knit team, particularly doing this latter stage with Network Rail's asset management team, design delivery, capital delivery themselves, and works delivery all working together, showing great teamwork, which is one of the things that the company is very proud of. And I think we here in Wales we are particularly good at that kind of thing, I think. I agree totally as well, Ryan, that, and well, both of you, that the solution does fit really well into the surroundings. And I know from personal experience that the local communities are extremely keen on keeping that railway operational, as much as possible. Yeah, I've seen that for myself at first hand. Back the other year when we were on that train round about the time of Eisteddfod. Good time was had by all, I have to say. So it goes. I don't think there's anything else I need to say apart from thank you very much again. Congratulations on a great presentation, and everybody can show their thanks in the usual manner. That'd be wonderful.
Unmute yourselves and give them a round of applause. Right, thank you, Barrett. Thank you, guys. Right, so before I close the meeting, are there any issues arising from the notes of the last meeting? Nope. Right, so the next meeting is on back to our normal, the second Monday, so it's on March the 8th at 5:15 again. It'll be another online meeting. And we've got Jeremy Rees, who some of you know, coming to talk to us about permanent way on the Isle of Man. Jeremy's the P-way engineer for the Isle of Man Railways. So it's, he's talked to us before, and it's absolutely fascinating what you can do when you're not tied by all these rules and regulations, and you can just get on with stuff. And then the April meeting, we're going to be talking about more flood works. Really, we've got Mark Howells coming to talk to us about the drainage works that were done at Cowley Bridge Junction. And again, another resilience project. We're very unlikely to ever manage to stop the railway being flooded there. But the same as we've talked about today, it's about once the flood water's gone down, it's getting the railway up and running again as quickly as possible. Okay. So if there's no other business, I will declare the meeting closed. Okay, I'll be hanging around for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat before you go, but otherwise I will see you all in the March meeting. Thank you. Right. Thanks, Alex and Ryan. That was really good.
That went okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really pleasing to see how successful it's been, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because considering the turbulence there must be with the water pouring over the top of the bank, it's good that it's disturbed it very little, isn't it? Yeah. And, I think that they must. When I've been involved with things like this in the past, there's always a slight worry that when you fix the obvious problem, it then reveals something that you hadn't, which I guess is like that little washout you had further up, isn't it? Yeah. Once you go beyond the end of what you've done, you're going to get a little bit of damage, which we probably would hardly noticed before, of course, with it. Yeah. If the embankment's missing, a little bit of ballast gone, it's not a big deal, is it?
Yeah, I think there's a section which I think Philip might be able to remember it going actually down towards Conwy, right on the bottom end of the Conwy Valley line, and that is affected by tidal surge flooding, which is different.
This is the bit where it runs literally at the edge of the estuary. Yeah,
right the way down at the bottom, and it's completely unprotected. But that hasn't failed. I remember the section manager taking me there, probably must have been like 2013, if not before, and it hasn't failed since. So obviously the failure mechanisms that are becoming more and more sort of virulent then are the rainfall flooding issues rather than the tidal surges. So it's such an interesting line, getting under the skin of the community as well, and understanding really what it means to them was a big part of what I did through 2019. And I can't